Hello, Rob Van here. Since I'm laid up in bed with a bad back and there may not be a chance of me getting into work for the first week or so, I'm going to go through what's going to go into the Component 3 Section 8 Television in the Global Age section that we're going to be studying for the first few weeks. So, as you can see, the two programs we're going to be watching are Series 1, Episode 1 of Life on Mars and Series 3, Episode 1 of the Swedish-Danish co-production The Bridge. Now, according to the syllabus, this is what we're going to be studying, okay? You as learners are going to have to develop the ability to analyze critically and compare how media products, including products outside the commercial mainstream, this is going to be The Bridge in our case, construct and communicate meanings through the interaction of media language and audience response. So we're going to be looking at close textual analysis of every episode. You need to know examples of cinematography, mise-en-scène, editing and sound and how they create meaning. So in your essays you're going to have to be able to say this is a meaning, and then you're going to have to prove it using examples of detailed textual analysis from the episode and back it up with theory. You've got to be able to use and reflect critically on a range of complex theories of media studies and use specialized subject-specific terminology appropriately in a developed way. You're going to have to go back and look at those theories we did in year one. You're going to need to know them by heart. You're going to be using them a lot. You've got to debate critical key questions related to social, cultural, political, and economic role of the media through sustained discursive writing. You're going to be writing essays in which you discuss things. Now, you're going to need to know the backgrounds of each of these television shows. You're going to need to know about the industrial elements of European co-productions. You're going to need to know about public service broadcasting. You're going to need to know the intertextual references of these kind of shows, all of that kind of stuff. And in your essays, you're going to have to construct and develop a sustained line of reasoning that's coherent. In other words, it makes sense, it's relevant, it's substantiated and logically structured in extended response. So you're going to be writing essays. You're going to need to back up your points with logical arguments that are substantiated by evidence, such as close textual analysis, theory, quotes, facts, figures, statistics, etc. So, it says, through an in-depth study of two contrasting programs, produced in different social and cultural contexts, learners would explore the dynamics that shape the contemporary television production, distribution, and circulation. So we're going to look at how these shows were produced, who made them, why they made them, how they were made, how much they cost, what channels they were shown on, who paid for them, where the money come from, how they were circulated. So we're going to have to look not just at the TV broadcast, but also things like DVD, Blu-rays, what we call aftermarket sales or sell-through. Then we're going to have to look at the video-on-demand distribution, like the fact that you can get Life on Mars on iPlayer, and the fact they constantly repeat it on things like, I don't know what channel it would be on, whatever, like the BBC does it all the time. So we're going to look at the public service broadcasting in the global marketplace, because you've got to remember that BBC isn't the only public service broadcaster, that the companies that made the bridge are also public service broadcasters in their respective countries. As learners will explore the significance of economic and industrial context in which set products are produced. Remember, we did a lot about public service broadcasting when we did Zoella when we did Late Night Woman's Hour. So go back, revise that. The way in which television industry is regulated and marketing strategies used to promote the set products will also be investigated. So we're going to need to look at the marketing and promotion of these shows. We're going to need to look at merchandising, how they exist as multi-platform brands. So there's going to be websites, there's going to be Twitter feeds, there's going to be Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Learners will also have opportunities to explore how television audiences are defined, constructed and targeted on a national and global scale. So who are these shows aimed at? Who are their target audiences? And we're going to look at the appeal for audiences and why people enjoyed them, why they watched them. So we're going to be looking at genre. We'll also be looking at fandom, relate that to Henry Jenkins, and how media audiences use those texts. So we look at things like fan fiction, fan art, things like that. So these are the two episodes we're going to be looking at. Life on Mars, UK TV programme, Series 1, Episode 1. It was originally broadcast in 2006 by the BBC. It was shown on BBC One. The entire of Life on Mars, both Series 1 and Series 2, are currently available on iPlayer. It's worth going and have a look at them. We'll also be looking at The Bridge, which is a Danish-Swedish co-production. This is Series 3, Episode 1. It was broadcast in 2015. In Sweden, it was broadcast by SVT1, and in Denmark by DR1. They're both public service broadcasters. But in the UK, it was broadcast on BBC 4. The BBC 4 is kind of quite a little sort of like niche audience for foreign language crime thrillers on a Friday or Saturday night. This has been going back to the early 2000s when they first started showing the French show Spiral or Engrenage. And of course that ties in with not just The Bridge, but also things like The Killing and Borgen and Wallander and all these other programs as well. So they've got a big thing for those, and they're very popular with a certain niche audience. So there is a long list of things that we're going to need to look at. So when it comes to media language, we need to look at how the different modes of language is associated with different media forms communicate multiple meanings. So we've got things that are polysemic. That means they have multiple meanings. Okay, so how do the media language communicate meaning to the audience? How the combination of elements influence meaning. So it's not just like how does mise-en-scène influence meaning, but how does mise-en-scène work with cinematography and editing and sound, all working together to create meaning. We're going to have to look at how developing technologies affect media language. So, for example, Life on Mars was shot on film, whereas The Bridge was shot digitally. How does that affect the look of the show, for example? We look at the codes and conventions of media forms and products, including the process through which media language develops through genre. So we're going to be looking at the TV crime genre and the subgenres that go with it. But also remember that Life on Mars is a hybrid genre because it's also a sci-fi time travel show. So how does it incorporate the generic conventions of both different genres as a hybrid? And in terms of The Bridge, we'll be particularly looking at the influence of film noir on the look in particular, but also the entire Nordic noir genre and how that comes from literature. So think about Joe Nesbo, for example, and things like the girl with the dragon tattoo and all that kind of stuff. Postmodernism is a big thing. We're going to be looking at intertextuality. So how does, in particular, the Life on Mars, how does it relate to the Sweeney? You need to understand the 1970s ITV cop show, The Sweeney, if you really want to understand Life on Mars. It's worth watching some episodes of The Sweeney. They're on ITV4, I think it is, pretty much every day at about 5 or 6 o'clock. Watch a couple of episodes of them. It's a great show anyway. Remember, intertextuality, Julia Kristeva, it's kind of postmodernism, Jean Baudrillard. How do audiences respond to interpret the above aspects of media language? So how does media created for the audience? Think about Stuart Hall with his preferred negotiated oppositional readings. We need to look at how genres are socially and historically relative and dynamic, and how they can be used in a hybrid way. So if they're dynamic, they change and evolve over time. So even though The Bridge, for example, has elements of film noir, it looks noirish. It doesn't exactly look just like a 1940s film noir. It just has similarities. And of course, does the fact that it's Danish and Swedish make a difference to the show, whereas Life on Mars is British? You also got to bear in mind both of these shows have been heavily remade. So Life on Mars has got American remakes, it's got Russian remakes, it's got Spanish remakes. Whereas if you look at The Bridge, that was remade in the UK as The Tunnel by Sky One, and there was an American one as well. We've also got to look at the significance of challenging or subverting genre conventions. How does it either follow or challenge those conventions, in other words? Particularly with Life on Mars, but I don't see why we can't talk about that with The Bridge as well. The significance of the varieties of ways in which intertextuality can be used in the media. Yeah, we've already done that. Basically, there's a lot of intertextuality going on in Life on Mars, not just with Sweeney. Think about viewpoints and ideologies. In particular, we're going to be looking at representations of gender, representations of criminality and law and order. Particularly on Life on Mars, the idea of, again, how politically correct culture has changed things in the modern era, in the 2005 versus 1973, I think is where it's set. In The Bridge, again, we're going to be particularly looking at representations of gender. We've got a main character who's got Asperger's. They never say it's Asperger's, but somewhere on the spectrum. And how does that affect representations of femininity? Also, something of a trope nowadays to have female detectives in TV shows. How does that compare with the way in which you have male heroes? Do they differ or are they similar? Whatever. So we're going to be looking at theories like Roland Barthes semiotics. We're going to be looking at narratology and Svetlana Todorov and how the stories are structured. We're going to look at genre, Steve Neal. We're going to look at structuralism, that's binary opposites, Claude Levi-Strauss. Postmodernism, Baudrillard, but we'll also look at Julie Kristeva as well for intertextuality. There's all sorts of representations we're going to look at, whether it be events, issues, individuals, social groups are represented through selection and combination. So this could be, in the case of Life on Mars, representation of the 2000s versus the 1970s. It could be the representations of the north of Manchester, and specifically it'll be the representations of gender and sexuality and ethnicity. On crime and law and order, in the case of The Bridge, it'd be the representations of Danish versus Swedish, male versus female, right wing versus left wing. And stereotyping in general. We're going to be looking at the representation, or the representation, how that media representation constructs versions of reality. How do these shows differ from reality? Remember, they're not meant to be realistic, they're TV shows. The process which leads media producers to make choices about how to represent issues, events, individuals and social groups. The effect of social and cultural context on the representations. How and why stereotypes used positively and negatively. How and why particular social groups in a national global context may be underrepresented or misrepresented. You could look at people of colour, for example, and how they're represented in Life on Mars. You could be, don't think there are any in The Bridge. It says something. We've got to look at how representations convey values, attitudes, and beliefs. So, what are the messages that are in these shows? How about the world and how these may systematically reinforce across a wide range of media representations. So, in this, we're looking at cultivation theory, for example. How audiences respond to and interpret media representations, the ways in which representation may claim about realism, the impact of cultural context on the choices made about producers and how to represent events, issues, individuals and social groups. Well, how are we going to make these shows saleable, not just domestically but internationally? What about the impact of, Netflix has had a massive impact on the popularity of these shows. So the number of people who've seen Life on Mars internationally now will have gone through the roof since it was shown on Netflix, for example. Historical context, obviously, especially with Life on Mars, since part of it was set in the past. How representation may invoke discourses and ideologies and position audiences. So how is this making us think about representations? Life on Mars in particular is there to make us think about how acceptable attitudes and behaviours and representations have changed dramatically in the 40 odd years between the past and the present depicted in the show. particularly with politically correctness and its attitudes towards women in particular. How audience responses to and interpretations of media representations reflect social, cultural, and historical circumstances. So again, those two are linked. Again, we're going to be looking at Stuart Hall's representations, Gauntlet's representations, and a lot of feminist stuff. Bell Hooks, Lisbeth Van Zunen, Judith Butler, and to a slight extent, but not much, theories about ethnicity and post-colonial theory, including Gilroy. We've also got to do media industries. So we've got to look again at how these things are produced, distributed, and circulated by organisations, groups, and individuals in a global context. So again, mainly we're talking about public service broadcasting here, but we're also talking about how European EU money is used to fund a lot of these things. And we're going to be looking at how, as I said, the global nature of things like Netflix and Amazon Prime have introduced these programs to a much wider audience. The specialised and institutionalised nature of media production, distribution, and circulation. Yeah, it's linked. The relationship with technological change. Again, think Netflix, think iPlayer, think. But also the fact that, when Life on Mars was made, it was shot on, I'm pretty sure it was shot on 16mm film, whereas The Bridge was shot on high-definition digital video, which gives both shows a very different and distinct look. Even though they could have shot Life on Mars on digital, it makes more sense to shoot it on 16mm to make it look more old-fashioned, to make it look more retro, to make it look more like the Sweeney. Patterns of ownership and control, conglomerate ownership, vertical integration, diversification. Well, again, that's public service broadcasting again. Significance of economic factors, including commercial and non-for-profit public funding, media industries and products. Again, that's the same thing. How media organisations maintain through marketing varieties of audiences nationally and globally. So who these shows aimed at, who they targeted at, how they marketed and promoted. Regulatory framework of contemporary media in the UK. Okay, so we'll look at what certificate these shows got, why they were given that by the BBFC, the fact they were both shown after the watershed, why, what is the watershed, that kind of stuff. The impact of new digital technologies and media regulation, including the role of individual producers. Well, obviously, no matter what certificate the the BBFC give a show, if you can pirate it off the internet, for example. How the production, distribution, and circulation shape media products. Life on Mars, in particular, was made in a world where people still watched a lot more linear TV, and you'd watch each episode when it was shown. Now we live in a world of binge watching. How does that change the way we watch television? Which brings us on to the next one. Impact of digitally convergent platforms for media production, distribution, and circulation. Obviously Netflix, Amazon Prime, iPlayer, etc. The role of regulation, we've already mentioned that. And the effect of individual producers on media industries. Are there some kind of showrunners as auteurs behind these? Is there some kind of, who made these shows? What track record have they got? What else they made? Things like that. So, power of media industries, current seat and regulation, Livingston and London, cultural industries, Hayes McGulch, usual. And then other theories, effects theory basically. So media effects, Bandura, cultivation theory, Gerbner, reception theory, Hall, fandom, Jenkins, end of audience, Shirky. So, we need to look at how audiences are grouped, categorized by media industries, including by demographics, that is age, gender, social class, as well as lifestyle, which is psychodemographics. How media producers target, attract, reach, and address these audiences. So we can look at the marketing and promotion, but also, what's in the shows that might target these audiences. How they do it through content and appeal, which is what I just said. Again, how they're marketed, distributed, circulated. The interrelationship between technology, consumption, and response. So, you're not old enough to remember when Life on Mars was on. If you have seen it, you'll have seen it through some kind of streaming platform like iPlayer. You might have seen it on DVD, whatever. This gives shows a much longer lifestyle. Lifespan, I mean. What else we got? Oh yeah, did you watch it by binge watching it, for example? How audiences interpret the media, whether they prefer to negotiate oppositional readings, that kind of stuff. How they interact with it, think fan culture, how do they get actively involved in media production? Are they creating their own fan art? Are they creating their own merchandise, their own fan fiction? Are they cosplaying these characters? whatever. Do any of them become sort of like cultural icons? How specialist audiences can be reached on a national and global scale through different technologies and platforms. How media organisations reflect the needs of mass and specialised audiences. So obviously they're both mass products, but if you're watching The Bridge in the UK, it stops becoming a mass product and becomes a niche product because it's foreign language. Although that is increasingly becoming, normal and common for even wider audiences. How one is use media in different ways, how it helps to reflect the demographic factors, as well as aspects of identity and cultural capital. In other words, how are perhaps these shows shaping people's own identity? Do people look at the characters in these shows and perhaps see them as role models? Particularly important when we're looking at the main character in the Bridge saga, Norrin, and how she has changed the representation of people with on the autistic spectrum, for example, and made them into heroes. The role and significance of specialised audiences, niche and found audiences in the media, and the way in which different audiences interpret and reflect social, cultural, historical circumstances. So, for example, how are we going to react to The Bridge when we are not its primary target audience because we're not Swedish or Danish? Is there things that the original audience would have picked up on that we won't notice, for example? So, that's a lot of stuff. I've gone through it pretty quickly. We've got a lot to cover in a very short amount of time. Just a reminder, Life on Mars is available on iPlayer. Worth going and watching it. It's very good. It'll be there for the rest of the year. Right, I've done this, as I said, because I've got a bad back and I might not be in. I can always go through this in class if I am in. If I'm not, I'm going to shove it on YouTube. It'll still be there if you missed a lesson or whatever. I will put some more videos up as well, just on the off chance that I'm not there for the first couple of weeks. If you've got any questions, you know where I am. You can email me. Okay, talk to you next time.